Welcome to Charmed, I'm Sure, the cozy, curious podcast where we uncover the hidden magic in everyday life. I'm Jen, and each episode we get charmed by a delightful topic that brings a little enchantment into everyday life. March has arrived, and with it comes a hint of Irish charm. This month, in honor of St. Patrick's Day, we're celebrating luck, lore, and enchanting curiosities that have fascinated people across time and place. Picture the Irish countryside just after sunset. The last light of day lingers over the green hills as the sky fades into blue-gray twilight. A cool breeze moves through the grass, and a lone hawthorn tree stands in the middle of a quiet field. To most people, it's simply part of the landscape. But in Irish folklore, places like this were never just scenery. In the half-light, long shadows stretch across the hills, the kind of twilight where anything could be hiding just beyond the trees. A place where wandering spirits, mischievous tricksters, and other mysterious beings were said to appear at the edge of night. In Irish folklore, the landscape was never as empty as it seemed. Today, we're being charmed by the magical creatures of Irish folklore and the remarkable stories that once filled Ireland's hills, coastlines, and forests. For much of Irish history, these beings were not treated as simple fairy tale characters. They were thought to exist alongside everyday life, in ancient hills, lonely fields, deep lakes, and windswept shorelines. Some were mischievous, some were protective, and some were best avoided entirely. Let's begin with the small figure who eventually became the most famous creature in Irish folklore. If there's one magical being most people recognize from Irish folklore, it's the leprechaun. Traditional stories describe the leprechaun as a solitary fairy who worked as a cobbler, quietly making and repairing shoes for the fairy world. He was often imagined as a small, elderly man dressed in green or red, carrying a tiny hammer. Some stories say that if you listen carefully in quiet places, you might hear the faint tapping of a tiny hammer somewhere nearby. According to legend, leprechauns guarded hidden stores of treasure, most famously a pot of gold. But catching one was nearly impossible. Folklore warned that if you looked away for even a moment, the leprechaun would vanish. Many stories describe humans briefly capturing one and demanding to know where the treasure was hidden. The leprechaun always agreed to show them, and almost always found a clever way to escape. These tales weren't really about gold. They were reminders that wit and clever thinking often matter more than strength. Leprechauns may be the most famous figures in Irish folklore today, but they're only one small part of a much older tradition. In Irish storytelling, the countryside was believed to be shared with a hidden world, one that existed just beneath the hills and fields. One of the most important figures in Irish folklore are beings called the Sídhe. The word originally referred to the grassy mounds and hills scattered across the Irish countryside. In traditional belief, these hills were thought to be entrances to another world hidden beneath the land. Over time, the name also came to describe the mysterious beings said to live inside of them. Unlike the tiny winged fairies of modern stories, the Sídhe were usually imagined as human-sized, sometimes even taller, with an otherworldly beauty that could feel both captivating and unsettling. Many stories describe them appearing at dusk, moving quietly through the fields before disappearing again into the hills. They were known for their unpredictable nature. Some tales say they might reward households that treated them with respect. Others warn they could lead travelers astray, steal small objects, or lure people away with beautiful music drifting across the countryside. There were even stories suggesting that time moved differently in their world. A single evening among the Sídhe might feel brief, but returning home, a person might discover that years had passed. Because of this, people sometimes referred to them carefully as the good people or the fair folk, not necessarily because they were kind, but because speaking of them politely was considered safer. And in parts of Ireland today, certain places connected to the fairy world are still treated with quiet respect, especially lone hawthorn trees and ancient earthen mounds. Among the many beings connected to the fairy world, some were playful and some carried a very different role. One of the most well-known figures in Irish folklore is the banshee. Her name comes from an old Irish phrase meaning woman of the fairy mound, linking her to the same fairy world as the Sídhe. Unlike many magical beings in folklore, the banshee was not known for tricks or hidden treasure. She was known for her voice. According to legend, her cry could sometimes be heard in the night before the passing of someone in a family. People describe the sound as a wail, a long, sorrowful cry carried on the wind and drifting through the countryside after dark. Stories describe the banshee appearing in different forms. Sometimes she's seen as an old woman with long, pale, or silver hair, and other accounts describe her as a young woman in a gray or green cloak, her hair loose in the night air, and her eyes red from weeping. In certain tales, she's seen sitting beside a stream or beneath a tree, slowly combing her long silver hair in the darkness. Some traditions suggested that particular Irish families had their own banshee, a spirit who appeared only for that lineage. And though her cry could be unsettling to hear, the banshee was not believed to bring misfortune. Instead, she was understood as a messenger, a mysterious figure whose voice marked an important moment in a family story. Not every creature in Irish folklore was so solemn. Some were wild, mischievous forces of nature, impossible to predict. One of the most fascinating creatures in Irish folklore is called the Púca. The Púca was a shape-shifting spirit, known for its unpredictable behavior. Stories describe it appearing as a black horse, a goat, a dog, or a shadowy human figure with animal features. Sometimes the Púca helped people. Other times, it led travelers off the road at night or played strange tricks on farmers. Its personality could shift from playful to unsettling at any time without warning. In many stories, the Púca appears around the time of Samhain. Samhain is an ancient Celtic festival marking the end of harvest and the beginning of winter. Many historians believe these traditions help influence what eventually became modern Halloween. During Samhain, it was believed that the boundary between the human world and the spirit world grew thin, and creatures like the Púca were thought to wander more freely. Not all creatures in Irish folklore lived on land. Some were said to rise directly from the sea. Along the rugged coasts of Ireland and Scotland, fishermen once told stories about Selkies. Selkies were mythical beings who lived as seals in the ocean, but could shed their skins and take human form on land. According to legend, on certain moonlit nights, They would come ashore and leave their seal skins on the rocks while they walked on the beaches as people. If someone found and hid a Selkie's sealskin, the creature could become trapped in human form. Many folktales describe Selkies who married humans, yet quietly longed to return to the ocean. And if they ever recovered their sealskin, they would slip back into the sea, leaving their human lives behind forever. And in Irish folklore, one final figure rides through the night, a bit darker than the rest. One of the most unsettling figures in Irish legend is called the dullahan. In many stories, the first sign of the dullahan isn't what you see, it's what you hear. The quiet countryside is suddenly broken by the sound of a horse galloping along a dark road. Out of the darkness rides a black horse carrying a headless rider across the fields. The rider is the dullahan, a mysterious figure said to travel the countryside at night. In one hand, he carries his own head, its eyes glowing in the dark, and a terrible grin stretched across its face. Some stories say he also carries a whip made from a human spine. According to legend, the dullahan rides until he suddenly stops, and when he calls out a person's name, their death soon follows. No lock or gate can keep him out. He rides wherever he pleases. Yet folklore holds one strange protection. Even the dullahan, it was said, would turn away from a small piece of gold. Folklore historians have also noticed something interesting about this eerie rider. Stories of the dullahan may have influenced later headless horseman legends that appeared in Europe and America. One of the most famous examples appears in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the 1820 story by American writer Washington Irving, where a ghostly headless rider travels through the countryside at night. While Irving's tale has its own setting and traditions, the haunting image of a rider carrying his own head bears striking similarities to the much older Irish legend. When you look across Irish folklore, one thing becomes clear. These stories are deeply tied to the landscape. Hills become fairy kingdoms, windswept roads hide wandering spirits, and the ocean itself holds mysterious visitors from another world. These tales help people understand landscapes that could feel vast, wild, and unpredictable. And perhaps that's why they still captivate listeners today. Thanks for getting charmed by the magical creatures of Irish folklore with me today. And if you enjoyed this episode, follow the show to keep discovering a little charm, curiosity, and inspiration each week. And now it's time for Practical Magic, a small idea from today's episode that you can bring into your own life. Folklore gave people a way to see meaning and mystery in the landscapes around them. A hillside wasn't just a hillside. A stretch of road might carry a story, and a quiet coastline could belong to creatures no one quite understood. This week, try looking at one familiar place through the same lens. Take a walk somewhere natural, a park, a wooded trail, or even a quiet street as the light begins to fade. As you walk, notice one place that feels a little atmospheric. A large tree, a cluster of stones, a bend in the path. Then pause for a moment and ask yourself, if people had been telling stories about this place for hundreds of years, what kind of folklore creature might pass through here? You don't have to believe in the old legends, but sometimes the easiest way to invite a little magic into everyday life is simply to notice that the world might still be holding a few stories. And if you happen to take that walk at dusk, you may find the landscape feels just a little more mysterious. Thanks for listening to Charmed, I'm Sure. And until next time, may every day bring a little charm your way.